What's up? How you doing? Here we are, beautiful day today. I got up this morning, came out here, and I said today is going to be a beautiful day. Why? Because the humidity was perfect. It's not a cloud in the sky, very dry. Temperature was like 77, and it just felt good out. Gave you that feeling of well-being inside, which is what makes or breaks the day. You know, it's like if you have a rainy day, it makes you feel a little bit, down. Not down emotionally, but down like, what am I doing today? I'm gonna get wet. But if you have a day like today, makes you happy to be alive, makes you happy to be walking around. So I enjoy these days, and there's a lot of them like that. Beverage here, water with ice. It's almost done. Even the birds are happy. So I have something here that for me is a good memory. Fat Albert. I love this cartoon. It spoke to me because it was the kind of lifestyle that I had as a kid. You know, city kid. I hung around the railroad tracks. They did the junkyard stuff. I also did the junkyard stuff. There was a place that I would go that was, I don't know how many acres. It was huge. And it was all these old cars that, had been in crashes and, whatever. Maybe they were just sold as being too old to drive anymore. So I would go there. And the Fat Albert cartoon, Saturday mornings, it was the very last one that would come on. The very last one. So I would get up at 7 a.m. I did not sleep in. I had to watch my cartoons, So I would get up at 7, I would watch, and then around 2 o'clock or so, this was the last one. It was bittersweet. Bittersweet because it was the last one, but I knew that it was one that I enjoyed. So I would watch that knowing that this is it. And just everything about them, if I was in the neighborhood, I guess this was supposed to be in South Philly, I would be friends with these kids. I would hang around with them, and I would probably play the tambourine. You know how they had a song at the end? But you would hear the guy singing, like Fat Albert was singing, and that was not his speaking voice, because they had another guy do the singing part. Bill Cosby couldn't do the singing, right? Wouldn't sound that good, I don't think. So I still enjoy Fat Albert, and this is the ultimate collection. So it has there are 4 discs in here, and there's 20 episodes, 20 classic episodes. One day I'm going to get the whole thing. I actually had the whole thing years ago, but when time moves on, you start losing things. So I don't know where it is now. It's probably inside somewhere. Got a couple of discs here, a couple there, but I'm gonna get the whole thing. But this one here has 20 of the classic episodes, and I enjoyed this a lot. It was, that I didn't see it back then as teaching me a lesson, but I guess it did. It was always something to learn. But you wonder how much of this you retain when you get older. You think there were people back that watched this back in the old days that now think about Fat Albert and the lessons they learned from this? I don't think so. I don't know how you can keep a memory. Even at school, you go to school, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade. How much of that do you actually retain? How many days do you remember out of those 8 years? I remember quite a few of those days, but it's not the majority. You don't sit there remembering every single day, every event. There's a few key moments that you remember from each class, but how many of those? And when it comes to the actual academics, how much of that do you retain throughout your life? We retain the ability to read, which is very important because that's how you keep learning. I think you retain the ability for basic math, because the other stuff, the more intricate math, trigonometry, calculus, if you took it, algebra, things like that, you don't use that on a daily basis, or that you're conscious of, and so over time you tend to forget the rules of that. So you need a refresher course. I mean, if you took somebody who was, say, 45, and you said we're going to give you a math test from what you learned in 10th grade, I'd say they get enough plus on that. Unless they took a refresher course and they said, oh yes, I remember some of that. But for the most part, you don't remember that stuff. And even history, any subject. Take any subject and ask a 45, 50-year-old, questions from a test that an 8th grader or a 10th grader would take. You're not going to remember a lot of that stuff. The stuff you remember is the stuff that you deal with every single day. That's the stuff that stays with you. But reading, if you constantly read about things that interest you, you will not forget that stuff. And if you're enjoying math and you have a book on algebra or calculus, geometry, things like that, and you constantly every single day do that, you will retain that information for life. But if the only math you do is, and we don't do any of this either, balance your checkbook, then that's about it. I think the times tables 1 through 12 remain with you for your whole life. Math, such as adding and subtracting, that remains your whole life. But the other stuff, you don't really keep all of that in your head. So, they try and teach you ethics at a young age, but I don't know how much of that you retain. And I think even ethics are kind of genetic in nature too. You tend to be the person you are based on the brain you have. There are some people, they want to do the underhanded stuff no matter what you say to them, and there are other people that don't want to do that. They don't want to do any of that stuff because that's not the way their brain works. So it all depends on the person and what you're working with to begin with. But anyway, I digress. I enjoyed the Fat Albert cartoon. Mushmouth, Dumb Donald, Weird Harold, Russell, Rudy. Everything about this, like I said, it was kind of like my childhood when I would watch it. I did all these things. I had a few friends that we hung around. We would disappear into the neighborhoods. Nobody knew where we were, just like these kids did back then. But back then that was common. Now it's constantly watching your kids. Your kids go 30 feet from you and you have the binoculars out watching. Checking your phone for messages, scanning where they are. You popping up on your screen with a dot. When I was a kid, we didn't do any of that stuff. Nobody knew where I was when I was a kid. I was with my friends, and we were always doing something that involved fun. We didn't do crazy things, We didn't get into the nutty stuff, but we played a lot. It was a fun time for me growing up, and I think about it now, and I miss those days. Not that I would be running around playing hide and go seek. I've said this before, but I used to think it was hide and seek. Yeah, I thought it was hide and seek. That people would say, you want to play hide and seek? They said it quickly that I never broke it up into words. I thought it was just hide and seek. And I said, I want to play hide and seek. And we'd play that. I remember playing that at night too. And it was, you could hide anywhere in the neighborhood. I don't know how they'd find you. They'd find you when you ran back to your goose to beat them, then they'd try and run after you. I'll tell you, I had a cousin, I still have this cousin, text once in a while, but it was nighttime out, and I was running to the goose, like $6 Million Man, running, slow motion. I was faster, I was ahead, and she was trying to get to the goose because I was trying to get her, but she was trying to get to the goose to save herself. And I was getting ready to, snatch her to say, I got you, and now it's your turn to find us. And my mother had a clothesline, 2 trees and a clothesline. Now you can imagine what happened. The clothesline was not rope. It was dark wire. thick, dark wire. And as my cousin was running really fast, and it's dark out, the next thing I noticed is that she went this way and backwards and fell down on the ground. And she was having a hard time breathing. So the wire, she ran and it hit her right here, right on the throat. Can you imagine that? I mean, you get hit like that lightly, and it triggers a gag reflex. Imagine running as hard as you could, right? And then having a wire unexpectedly show up in front of you and clothesline you here. So I remember she was having a hard time breathing, and then many years went by, decades actually went by, and I was talking to her about it. And I said, you remember that time? And right when I said what I said, she goes, you know what? I had forgotten all about that, but now that you mentioned it, she goes, you brought the memory back. So yeah, that was, you know, that happened to Jay Leno. He was on his motorcycle, doing his thing, right? And then there was some rope or something in the way, and it caught him, and he fell off the bike, injured himself. So, but anyway, I loved this cartoon. Love this cartoon, and they had the personality of kids that, you know, I hung around with. You know, kids that wanted to play and have fun. And like I said, in my time back in those days, most parents allowed their kids the freedom to go and play where they wanted to. They didn't even ask where you're going. They would just be, they're outside somewhere. My mother to this day has no idea that I would go and hang around at the railroad tracks when I would get off school. I had no idea about that. Just thought I was in the backyard or a neighbor's yard or something. She didn't realize that I was way on the other side of my area there, playing at the railroad tracks every day after school. And then Saturdays and Sundays, especially after cartoons, I would take off and I would go really far away from my house, walking around like a zombie. And I would run into kids from my neighborhood that I'd see at school the next day. You know, one time I was like, I don't know, like 12 blocks away or something, which is quite a distance when you're 5. I was 5 years old, I was walking, and then all of a sudden I see one of the girls from my school, kindergarten, and she got out and she was giggly and everything, and I was giggling back. And then I kept going, and then the next day we're at school because it was a Monday, and she saw me, and they had her sit next to me that day. We put our seats in a circle, and then she's sitting next to me, and she's giggling for no reason, and I'm giggling for no reason because we saw each other. We saw each other out of school. We thought that was funny. So who knows whatever happened to her. And she had a sister who was probably like 2 or 3 years older. So it looked like a bigger version of her. Like if somebody said, this is what you're going to look like in 3 years, that would be very accurate. They looked clones, like clones of each other. So anyway, I was all over the place. If you tell my mother now where I was when I was 5 years old, she would think, you know, you're making it up, or it never happened, because she didn't know about it back then. But I was all over the place. And then when I hit 6th grade, I was riding the subway system all day. I had a fascination with trains. I'd get on the subway system and I would stay on it all day, and then I'd break it up, have a snack at some point in the morning, then I would have lunch, then after that a little more riding on the trains, and then I'd have another snack, and then I would head home. And nobody would say, what'd you do? Where were you today? They all thought that we were somewhere in the neighborhood. Somebody's house, somebody's backyard, because in my neighborhood in those days there were a lot of kids. But we all played hard. What else could you do? That was what kids did back then. They played. Now when I got a bike, I would even go further out. But yeah, it was fun in those days. The companies that came up with the idea of cartoons in the Saturday morning time, you know that, they had a great idea there. They gave us a good memory to live off of now. You know, I remember all those days in my room. I had a good sized bed. It wasn't a single, it was like a double or a queen, you know, one of those. And while the cartoons were playing, I had my windows open I had a cross breeze going through, especially fall time. I used to love that crisp fall air. Had a nice, fresh smell to it. And anybody who knows what I'm talking about knows what I'm talking about. So anyway, I would have that, and then I would watch the cartoons, and I had them all memorized. I knew, channel 4, 5, 7. I knew exactly what was playing at what time, so I would flip back and forth. None of this remote control stuff either. I had to get up and actually, I had a Zenith in my room, a black and white Zenith, and that one took time to warm up. Had to wait a minute to warm up the insides. And then it would come on, and I'd watch, and I had these pillows. I had a big, fat pillow, and then I had my regular pillow, and I would put them in front of me, and I would get back on the backboard there, on the bed, the headboard, and I'd get to the top of that, and then I'd leap, and for, I don't know, I was up there for like a tenth of a second, and I hit the bed again, but it felt to me like I was flying for a moment. And then I would land on the pillows, and I did that all day, until 2, until this came on, and then it finished, and then I would go in the kitchen. Another thing I would do is I would jump on the bed. Up and down, up and down, up and down, just jumping. And that was very fun for me. And then once Fat Albert came on, then I would go down and find somebody to play with. There was always somebody available. But I remember, and then Sundays was another day where there wasn't any cartoons, but I would get up and I would watch, they had an art show back then. You draw with the guy that was drawing, he was like a captain guy. And then after that, if we weren't doing anything with the family, which usually on weekends, my family would go out somewhere. That was part of our tradition. My father would say, if a lot of times we'd leave Friday and we'd go to Maine or something, and we'd stay up there for the weekend, which I love Maine. Maine is one of my favorite states. Love Maine. But my father would make a plan, and we'd get in the station wagon and head to Maine and spend 2-3 days there, especially if it was like a holiday. Get the Monday off too. Or if my father was not going to bring us somewhere on Saturday or Friday, then Sunday definitely we always would do something. We'd go for a nice ride. I remember one particular, Sunday we'd always do something. Is that what I said? But I remember one particular Sunday, my mother was busy. She was doing some cooking stuff and cleaning and all that, so she told my father, take him somewhere. So we got in the station wagon, and we ended up driving to the rural part of the state. It felt like I was in the deep south. That's what it felt like. And it was all, rural. Kind of like, a lot of dirt trails for bikes and things like that. And I remember we were in the station wagon. I was looking out the window, and that was in the prime of my mini bike and go-kart desire days. I really wanted a go-kart. And if I couldn't have a go-kart, I would settle for a mini bike. So we were in this area of the state where a lot of kids had mini bikes. And as we're driving, I would look out the window and I would see these trails and kids that were my age on mini bikes. And I was like, oh man, if I could only get a mini bike or a go-kart, that would be satisfying to me. Never happened. Never happened. But I always wanted it. And I remember even now, if it wasn't for the mini bikes during that day, probably that day would have evaporated into nothingness, and I wouldn't remember it now, because it's been decades, right? Many decades. You're not going to remember that one day for no reason, but because it had mini bikes that I saw that day, I remember it. And I was picturing myself, just on the mini bike going, weird places in my area. I didn't know back then you couldn't ride a mini bike on the street. I thought you got a mini bike or a go-kart, they'd say, yeah, go to the mall. It's a bird way up there on the tree. Anyway, but I never got a mini bike, and to this day I'm very disappointed. And a go-kart. Go-kart was like my #1 desire back then. Wanted that go-kart. and they were $900. The one I wanted was $900. And I know my father back then would be like, 900? What are you talking about? We paid $178 for your bike. So it was just a dream I had. Never came to be real. And even the mini bikes too. I wanted one of those. Would have not minded if I had both, right? So anyway, great memories. I had a really good childhood, really good fun times, bike riding, cartoons, trips to the state of Maine. I don't know how many times I've been to Maine. Even as an adult, when I grew up and I got my own license, I would go to Maine. I would go up there and go deep into the forests of Maine, the beaches, all that. Beaches are cold though, you can't swim. I mean, you can, but it's chilly. But I remember Saturdays, that feeling of happiness that it would bring to me. Saturdays. Sundays were a little bit sad. You'd say, okay, Sunday is here, but Sunday, once it's over, we're back to school. And it wasn't like school was, you know, I just enjoyed the time off from school. So, yeah, that's how it was. But today we featured Fat Albert. Good, clever cartoon, but how much of the lessons on this do you remember? Anyway, that's it for now. Ciao.